right, board members. I'm going to grab one.
Board members, calling this summer meeting to order. Might as well have fun. We're here. My name is Fran Reichenbach. I'm the president of Beachwood Canyon Neighborhood Association. So, this is Larry Marks. He is our board member.
And board.
And our vice president.
Master at Arms.
And Master at Arms.
That's right. I cut
Secretary.
off people if they speak for more than 10 minutes.
George Abrahams. He's founder and board member.
And he's not bored.
He's not board.
No,
Jack
or boring.
Fitzgerald, board member. Nina Van Tassel. And Bruce Worrell. I'm sorry, Bruce. I always mess up your last name.
That's perfect.
Gary Willis is not. Gary Willis, our district lines around. So Berman will not be our council, our congressman, right?
Yes.
Will be you.
Knock over.
Knock on wood.
Knock on wood.
If
It will be you.
If we have anything to say.
Oh, come on. We've got a shoe in.
Congressman Adam Schiff.
Thank you very much for inviting me. It's really a treat to come and spend part of an evening with you. And I thought I would tell you a little bit about the district, a little bit about myself, and a little bit about what's going on in Congress.
You know, for a very long time, everyone's been complaining about the helicopter noise. And it's actually been going on for decades.
I was invited to a meet and greet like this in West Hollywood, and the issue of helicopter noise came up. And at that time, it was when Lindsay Lohan was making her frequent court appearances, and as if on cue, a helicopter buzzed us, and we had to kind of cease our conversation. It's not always that your point gets made so graphically on cue. But let me just tell you a little bit about the district. I know it's a little mysterious. The redistricting process is probably nothing more dull for the general public than redistricting, and probably nothing more interesting to members of Congress than redistricting. Up until this past year, it was always done by the state legislators. Voters took that power away from the legislature. Now, the legislature used to not only draw their own lines, but they drew the congressional lines as well. And probably the narrowest self-interest was when they were drawing their own lines. But there was also a heavy degree of self-interest in drawing the congressional lines, because those who wanted to run for Congress one day would like to draw them the way they thought would be most advantageous. But in any event, the ballot measure established an independent commission of about a dozen people who probably within the first week of serving on the commission thought they needed to get their head examined, because it was the most laborious and painful and often tedious, thankless job you could possibly ask for. They traveled up and down the state, had endless public hearings. So that was the job it had to do, and I think they actually did it quite well. It's not the way I would have drawn the lines, although if I drew them, then I'm sure other people would have lots to complain about. I think they met the criteria, and they operated in an incredibly transparent way. So I think it was a real improvement on the process in the past. The long and the short of it is, this new district goes all the way from La Cañada, La Crescenta, Montrose, San Antonio, and Palms Forest. It comes south of the western district of Pasadena, all of Glendale, 3/4 of Burbank. Comes further south through Atwater Village, Echo Park, Silver Lake, Los Feliz, Hollywood, Hollywood Hills, East Hollywood, and West Hollywood. So all of Hollywood, the area, it seems a little less rational, because you have West Hollywood and La Cañada in the same district. But it is, I think a pretty good job, and that's sort of what the boundaries look like. My current district has the largest chunk of that. It has Burbank, Glendale, and Pasadena. I used to have many of the areas that are now being included in the district again. I used to have La Cañada, La Crescenta, Summit, Tahunga, Silver Lake, and Los Feliz, and Atwater. The only areas that are completely new to me are Hollywood, West Hollywood, and River Chicken. I hope you won't have to use it on.
Not on speakers, but we have some people that sometimes talk a little too much.
Oh, I would love to have one of those in committee. I've been in Congress for 12 years. I was elected in 2000. For those of you that may have lived up in that part of the district or in Silver Lake, Las Vegas, you might remember the race. It was, I ran against the Republican incumbent, a guy named Jim Rogan. It was the most expensive race for the House in history. It may still be. He raised $6.8 million. I raised $4.3 million. I was the bargain basement candidate. And then there were about $5 million in independent expenditures. And it is a little bit like going back to the future in the sense of campaign finance, because what was really troubling for me in that race wasn't all the millions my opponent was spending. I wasn't happy about it, but at least I could hold him accountable for whatever he said. What was more terrifying were the independent expenditures, the $5 million that people spent, or companies spent, or industry spent. That I could not think that it was just the Citizens United opinion that's a problem. And that decision is a problem. It says that corporations are people, and I don't think they are. As Justice Stevens in the dissent in that case wrote, if corporations are really to be treated like people for the purposes of the First Amendment, then how can we deprive them of the right to vote? On the Intelligence Committee, obviously, we oversee all of our intelligence agencies. I have to say I find that work very important these days, but also among my most interesting and enjoyable challenges, because it's the least partisan committee now. In the Intelligence Committee, we actually work together quite well, and it's fairly nonpartisan or bipartisan. And it is sad, but not entirely coincidental, that this is the only committee that doesn't meet publicly. I think that outside of the area of the intelligence agencies, where part of our budget is public and part of our budget is not, those numbers are all accessible because you can see what we spend on our foreign assistance programs. You can see how much we're providing in foreign aid to Pakistan, how much we're providing to Egypt, how much we're providing to Israel. So most of that information is public. Now it is probably not very easy to assimilate in the categories you described, and part of the challenge might be, what is nation building? Are we nation building in Pakistan? Are we nation building in Egypt? When we are making efforts to support the Arab Spring or helping to encourage Egypt to move in a democratic direction. So you can certainly, if you want to use the broadest estimation, consider everything that we provide in foreign assistance to those countries as nation building. Pakistan does also provide us intelligence and does things which help us. So they both help us and they hurt us. I remember speaking with the Pakistani ambassador about a year ago when things were getting really bad. And I said, the only thing that has changed in the U.S.-Pakistan relationship is that, the Pakistanis have not thought very highly of Americans for some time. And they really don't like Americans very much. And the only thing that has changed is now it's reciprocal. And we feel the same way about you. And I said, we've gotten to the point where it's like you're in a really bad marriage, and you've got to think, is it time for a divorce? And he was very quick, and he said, well, yes, Congressman, but we have to think of the children. That was his response.
About the problem with Afghanistan, whatever. But is it really our job to well, we care, but to really have to try and solve these problems? I mean, they have countries, they need to deal with their own things, and I think we are doing more harm than good many times by trying to inject our morals, our way of life, and so on them, because they're clearly not interested in being democratic or whatever it is. And I wonder if we, at the basic level, are just wasting our time and money and citizens.
It's a fair question. I think there are really two aspects to our foreign assistance efforts. One is plainly altruistic, and a lot of the resources we devote to attacking the problem of hunger and poverty on the African continent, for example, is not something that we expect to derive any particular benefit from the United States. But a lot of our foreign assistance is very self-interested. This is very helpful to hear because I've heard a lot of support for the Hollywood cap proposal, and it's important for me to hear the other views as well. And I'd be interested to look at the AQMD or South Coast air quality analyses. So, you know, Eric Garcetti said something that has kind of stayed with me. We had breakfast together about 9 months ago, and I was trying to pick his brain about Hollywood, and he said you could be the congressman of Hollywood and not have enough time left over for anything else, and still not be able to understand all of the issues in Hollywood.
These issues, and we try to steer them to one place, and then that place gets crowded. This is not, we're not set up for any stuff.
Here we go. Last night, which I thought ought to be a no-brainer.
Yeah,
And that is, the helicopters ought to be labeled on their belly,
that's what I'm
so you can tell who they are and where they come from.
It's a much larger issue, and that is whether or not we want to see Hollywood develop to the extent that it would be developed under the current version of the Hollywood Community Plan, which we feel is based upon hopelessly erroneous assumptions that were basically hand-fed to the people that drafted the plan by the developers. And this is something, as George mentioned, we're part of an association of groups that have sued the city. There are 3 different lawsuits, and I'm sure you're aware that there are 3 different lawsuits challenging the Hollywood Community Plan precisely because we view it as a matter of overdevelopment. Now, obviously, the other side is businesses are entitled to be in business. Businesses are entitled to make money. And so there's a real difficult balance to be struck between those, conflicting interests. We would love to see Hollywood develop and, become better and better and better and better. We don't want to see 55-story skyscrapers put where the Capitol Records
Built
built.
a number of forums, not ones that are focused on my introducing myself to people, but rather hearing debate about community plans and whatnot, and I've gotten a good sense of just how controversial that is, and I know that's going to be one of the really big decisions. Well, I'm originally from Boston, and we moved from there. My father was in the rag business. He was in the garment business, and he was transferred to Arizona when I was 9, so we moved to Arizona for a couple of years. Then we moved to Northern California when I was 11, and I lived there up through high school, and went to college at Stanford, and went to law school at Harvard, and then came to LA to clerk for a federal judge. And after my clerkship, went to private practice for a short time, and then I joined the U.S. Attorney's Office, and I was a federal prosecutor for 6 years. And then went back to private practice and ran for the state senate, and served 1 term in the state senate before I ran for Congress. I married a woman named Eve. We're actually Adam and Eve.
And you must be Jewish.
Well, yes. We did not name my son either of the obvious choices. We named him Elijah instead. My daughter Alexa, my daughter is 14, and my son is 10. And they're pretty much my my non-working hours, and delightfully so. I started doing triathlons with my chief of staff, Tim Bergering, a few years ago, so I like doing those. I guess that's my hobby now. I did the one in New York 3 weeks ago, and the Hudson was just as bad as you hear. The one thing that was good about the swim in the Hudson was it was very fast because the current is very quick. So I had a Michael Phelps-like time for the mile. Of course, I did see a 2x4 going even faster than me, so it had nothing to do with my swimming prowess. But apart from that, I love going to the movies, so I'm in the right town for that. And excited to have West Hollywood in the district. I have to chuckle about my first West Hollywood City Council meeting. I was asked to swear in the new mayor of West Hollywood, and which I did, and I was sitting in the audience, and John D'Amico, one of the council members, was paying tribute to the outgoing mayor, John Duran, and Did so, among other things, by saying that, John, I've always said about you, you're the biggest queen in the village. To which the mayor looked out at me in the audience and said, Congressman, you probably don't hear that every day at the La Cañada City Council meeting. I had to say, that is true. I have never heard that at a city council meeting. So it is, it's an exciting new district.
Well, we certainly hope that you're going to be our guy. And I have a feeling that this is going to be.
For many more years.
Thank you very much.
All right.